Okay, so our story begins in Tarsus, right over here in Tarsus, where Paul is from. Paul then makes the trip to Damascus in Syria. This is Syria over here. And as he is traveling to Damascus, he is converted. Ananias, if you'll remember, is from Damascus. And so then Saul, who's still called Saul, preaches in Damascus, and he has some agitators, and then he escapes through the hole in the wall in the basket. Remember that story? That happens in Damascus. And so from there, he goes to Jerusalem. Okay, so he's in Jerusalem, and they send him back to Tarsus. So he goes home. Meanwhile, the church in Antioch, which is here, this is where Antioch is. The church in Antioch has been started by Stephen, and they send Barnabas to Antioch too. And Barnabas goes to Antioch, and then he's sent to Tarsus to pick up Paul and bring him back to Antioch. And one of the themes of the Acts of the Apostles is back to Antioch for Paul. So he comes back to Antioch, and Paul and Barnabas are called from Antioch to go on their first missionary journey. They sail out of Cilicia, which is right here. This is where they sail from, to Cyprus. They visit two cities in Cyprus, Salamis and Paphos. And Paphos is where they find that magician. And they remember that guy who was a magician. They found him. So then they go from Paphos to Perga in Pamphylia. So this area right here is called Pamphylia, and Perga is where they meet up with. This is actually where John Mark leaves Paul and Barnabas, or Saul and Barnabas, and goes back to Jerusalem. And that'll become important later. So they are in Perga in Pamphylia, and they travel from there to Antioch, Pisidia. So this is Antioch, Pisidia, right here. It's a different Antioch. This is Pisidia, this area right here, and this is the Antioch, Pisidia city right here. So they go to Antioch, Pisidia, and this is where all the trouble happens. Big apologetic speech here. So many followers that the persecution was stirred up, and they had to shake the dust off of their shoes or shirts or whatever, and they left there for Iconium. The same thing happened. So they retreated from Iconium and went to Lystra and Derbe. So they're in Lystra, where Paul is stoned in Lystra, except he escapes, and then they get him to Derbe safely. Then they go back, retracing their steps through Perga, Attalia. These are in what we call Pamphylia area. And then they go back to Antioch. Then passing through Phoenicia and Samaria, which are over here off the map, they go back to Jerusalem. And this is where they have the Gentile meeting in Jerusalem, where James helps them draft this letter to the Gentile believers, and then sends them back up to Antioch with the letter. So they go back up to Antioch, and this is 1536, where they are sent on another journey, Paul and Barnabas. And at this point, they're in Antioch, sent on another journey, And this is where they split up over taking John Mark, who left them over here, with them to the next place. Paul wants to go without him because he deserted them. Barnabas wants to go with him. So they split up, and Silas goes with Paul and John goes with Barnabas, and we don't hear about where they go. But Paul goes to Derbe and Lystra, and that is where he meets Timothy. So Timothy becomes Paul's companion then. And also in this section, it goes to first person plural. So we got somebody else in there. Okay, so after he meets Timothy here, that's where he has the dream of the man of Macedonia. If you look over here, this is where Macedonia is. And so this is where the magic happens. He has the dream here of going to Macedonia, and says that's where they need to go. So he has this vision, and then what they end up doing is going to Troas. And then from Troas, they go through Samothrace, and here's Thrace, and they go to Neapolis. So what happens is they visit these places. Neapolis is, from Neapolis, they travel to Philippi. And now you know Philippi is going to become very, very important. These are the regions of Macedonia that you want to be a part of. So Macedonia, they go to Philippi. Now Philippi, things happen in Philippi. They meet Lydia. This is where the slave girl, they cure her, and then they're thrown into prison. And then the miracle happens with the jailer. And then they go to Thessalonica. So Thessalonica is not printed on this map, but it is right here by this little bay, and this is Berea right underneath. So they go to Thessalonica next, and this is where Jason is attacked. Remember Jason? And but Paul and Cyrus escaped to Berea from Thessalonica, and there is trouble from Thessalonica. The opponents in Thessalonica who attacked Jason or also visit them in Berea with opponent and gather more opponents there in Berea. So their problems just kind of follow them, and you've seen that before. And then they sent just Paul alone from Berea to Athens. Then after Athens, they come to Corinth. And this is where they meet Priscilla and Aquila, and they are rejoined by Paul is rejoined by Timothy and Silas. And when they leave Corinth, they set sail for Syria to, come back over here. But what happens is Paul is warned not to do this. And so when he reached Ephesus, right here, he left Priscilla and Aquila there and went on to Jerusalem. So he goes to Jerusalem, and Paul alone then goes to Antioch. And then throughout Galatia, which is this region right here, and Phrygia. So he's in this area, going throughout this area here. And then until eventually he comes to Ephesus again. And he stops in, this is Asia, where Ephesus is. He stays in Asia. And after the almost riot that happens in this area, so after the almost riot in Ephesus, he leaves for Macedonia again and ends up in Greece, which, here's Athens, here's Corinth, this is Greece. So that's where he goes next. So Paul is about to set sail for Syria again, just to go back to this side over here, when he hears of a plot, and he's over here in what they call Greece, but he's been to Athens and Corinth, and he goes to leave, and he finds out this place, and so he decides to go through Macedonia instead. So he travels back up and sails from Philippi to Troas, and then from Troas he goes to Assos, and he eventually lands in this town called Miletus. Okay, so Miletus is not on my map either, so I had to put it, it's right over here under Ephesus. So it's not far from Ephesus, but when he gets to that place, he beckons the leaders, the elders from Ephesus, to come to him. And this is where he has that farewell speech, that long farewell speech that's so wonderful. And then from there, they go to Kos, which is this little island right here. And then Rhodes, which is this bigger island right here. And then there's a couple other places that aren't on this map, Patara and Phoenicia. And then eventually they end in Tyre right here. And they go to, but because he's destined to go to Jerusalem, but he's told in a dream not to go to Jerusalem. So he goes to Ptolemais. This place right here underneath Tyre. And so then from there, he goes to Caesarea, and that's where he's at Philip's house. And then after he visits Philip's house in Caesarea, he goes back to Jerusalem, where he is arrested. So that catches us from the beginning of Paul's journeys, from his conversion on the road to Damascus, from Tarsus to Damascus, to the chapter 21, where he has traveled to Jerusalem and is arrested in Jerusalem.